go in the direction that your parents tell you to go at a young age, and then go in the direction that your boss tells you to go when you get to an older age.
Yeah.
But it's the step back and the asking yourself the why and the what questions that can really help you start to come up with some interesting revelations.
Yeah. And I was thinking the other day how, as humans, our willingness to do things we hate in order to provide for our families or provide for ourselves or various other reasons. I mean, the willingness to put ourselves through this. I mean, we sometimes, I think, have to give ourselves like, wow, you're willing to do that. You know what I mean? Like, and it's, but again, like we've been talking about, we don't have to do these things that we hate. And that's, and so someone who has explored these or even is willing to, right. But feels like they're ready to move out of their current position. Are there things to look for during an interview process to find a career that someone loves? Or maybe there's also red flags to look for that would help somebody avoid running and fleeing like we're talking about today, so they don't flee to another job that they hate. Is there any specific advice you can offer on that?
Yeah, that's a great question, especially right now with so many people interviewing.
Right.
So I would say before you start interviewing and before you start either soliciting job offers or being open to interviews is just get really clear on what you want and spend some time thinking about what your strengths are and then what really makes you happy, and make sure that the jobs you're interviewing for encapsulate both of those things. That's the first step. When you get into the interview, it's good to be clear about what you're looking for. Are you looking for more of a collaborative environment? Are you looking for an environment where you can work from home? This is a big one right now.
Right.
Be clear on if you want to work from home or if you're willing to work from the office, because companies and people both have very strong opinions about this.
Right.
So spend some time in advance, not only making sure that the roles you're interviewing for are ones that are going to make you happy and cater to your strengths, but also what's important for you in a corporate environment. A really good way to, in the interview process, start to pull this out is ask questions that show that you've done your research. So you're still selling yourself via these questions. It shows that you're informed and you're invested, but also you can show your cards in terms of what your values are. So, for example, tell me what it looks like. Tell me what excellence looks like in the organization. So that can be a really telling question as to what people are expecting and if it's realistic.
That's a great question.
So questions around that. Another tactic that's good to employ is outside of the interviewer themselves, there's going to be some questions that you're going to want to be candid on that you might not want to cover in an interview. So use LinkedIn to try to find other people in the organization who you can have frank conversations with and ask them your questions. So it's kind of like looking under the hood of a car before you decide to buy the car. Make sure that the structure that's in place is one that's going to embody the environment you want to be in.
Yeah. One question I always asked was, why was the position open? Because I was really curious.
That's a good one.
Are the doors is this a revolving door for this? Is it stressful? Are there other reasons why this position is open? Or is it new? Is it newly created because you saw a need? That tells me, okay, there's some innovation here, or some willingness to identify a need and actually do something about it. Or is there, I've had because the work that I've done over the years is in IT consulting. And so sometimes they'll try to combine roles, which is a huge, huge no for the work that I do, because they're not the roles they try to combine are independent roles. So asking somebody to basically do two roles is trying to get one person, pay one person for two jobs. So that to me is a red flag, that kind of stuff. So there's sometimes industry specific things once you've been around for a while, or even if you haven't been around for a while, being able to talk to other people who have and ask them those kinds of questions so that going in, like, wait a minute, this probably is not a realistic ask of somebody.
Yeah, that's a great question too, is fully understanding the scope of what you're responsible for. And particularly, as you start to climb and get deeper into a certain functionality, you'll know what's possible and what isn't, and what sets you up for success and what's going to bury you. Yeah.
Yeah. And another thing I always did was set standards for myself before going in, especially as it related to salary, because if you're working with a recruiter, sometimes it can be very easy. They'll try to sway you one way or the other, because they have an incentive for you to take the job, and sometimes they'll try to talk you out of it, or they'll try to tell you, well, everybody else is at this rate. And my response to that was always, well, I'm not everybody else. So that has no, bearing on me. So I think having some confidence in that way in yourself and understanding this is my limit, right? I'm not accepting less than this, or I'm not accepting, maybe somebody wants to work from home permanently or only wants to go into an office a couple times a day, right? Setting those standards for yourself and not wavering from that. Because I found in the past when I wavered from those things, the dissatisfaction was like immediate, like within a month or two, and then I'm like, oh, here I am again in another situation like this,
Regret inevitably follows. That's a great point. And back to like what's changed now that we're in 2020 pandemic era. The two questions you want to get super clear up front is continue with the salary questions. And by the way, a lot of states now make it illegal for employers to ask what you're previously making in an effort to remove the glass ceiling. So that's good to know in research.
That is,
a lot of states can't ask you what you've been making. So come prepared with the number that you want to make. Yeah. And then the other question that people should be prepared to answer is, what type of work where do you want to work? Do you want to work from home? Do you want to work from the office? Do you want to work hybrid? Because companies have their expectations, people have their expectations. And if those don't line up in the beginning, it's a waste of time to continue with the interview.
Exactly. And I always think about that too. When I had worked with recruiters before or whatever, I'd set up using my expectations. So I'm just telling you this because I don't want to waste anybody's time. And I think that's, and people appreciate that, right? Because they don't want to waste their time on you if you're not, if you're not going to fit what they're looking for. But, having that confidence, I think also, it can feel a little discouraging at first. This is my experience, so it might not be everybody's, but it feels a little discouraging at first because sometimes I feel like, oh, am I missing out on something? But then I'm like, wait a minute, no, I'm not, because I'd be settling for less if I took these other things, right? So that it can feel a little bit like that. I felt at least at first, but then I found that it was worth it to get to what I really wanted. Yes.
And there are times when people are so miserable in a job and another job opportunity comes. It's like a lifeboat. They just want to jump on regardless of
the fleeing.
How inflated the lifeboat is.
Right. Yes.
But yeah, particularly in this environment that we're in, there are lots of jobs and it's a candidate's market. So don't be afraid to ask what you're worth.
Yeah. And I think so. One other point on this, and I feel like this is kind of the elephant in the room because I don't think this conversation would be complete without bringing this up. But, a lot of people are facing job loss due to various mandates that are happening that they may not agree with. And I won't go into detail. Anybody that's lived and breathed the past year and a half knows what I'm talking about. But, there's situations that are happening where people are being forced out because they don't agree personally with what's being requested of them. And I have friends facing this. My personal belief on that is if you're in a situation like that, it's for a reason, that you're going to come out on the other side doing something you're meant to do, that you're happier with, that is more in alignment with what your values truly are. But I know it's easy to sit here and say that, but when you're in the situation, it's extremely stressful. So can you offer any advice to people who may be going through that, or maybe even people who don't like their job, but don't feel they can leave at the moment? Can you offer advice of how they can maybe at least decrease some of the stress that they're facing?
Yeah, that's a greate question. To your first point is is this going to work out? It is so stressful when you're in the moment. I often ask my clients to reflect on past situations when there's been immense stress and times of change and what happened as a result. And every single time they're like, oh yeah, it always works out. And I'm
right. I survived it, right?
That thing that I wanted. Yeah, it didn't happen because I wouldn't have met XYZ or I wouldn't have found XYZ.
Exactly.
Happening. Everything is going to happen that's meant to happen, no matter how much you try to change the course of events.
Right.
So there's sort of like peace and solace in knowing that. And then the other piece of that is if you are in a situation, and this is very real, and I don't want to minimize, there are times when you have to stay in situations you don't like because of resources.
Right.
And that's a very real thing. And the key to that is going back to mindset. How much are you beating yourself up because of an unhappy situation that you're in? Are there ways that you can be nicer to yourself? Are there ways that you can build in more time to recharge? Are there ways that you can allow the stress and unhappiness of your current situation to dominate your thoughts less? Now, oftentimes this is easier said than done, right?
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
People say this, just don't worry about it. Da, 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 da.
Yeah, no. Yeah. And then that's when people push stop and they're like, no.
Yeah, right. I hear this all the time, but really, what does it look like?
Right.
A really easy way to do this, and this is an exercise I'll take a lot of my clients to, is just track your self-narrative through the day. What are you telling yourself? What are the conscious and sometimes unconscious thoughts that are coming up? This is your low-hanging fruit.
Right.
If you can intercept those really negative, self-destructive thoughts and replace them with more encouraging, supportive thoughts, your current situation won't change, but the way your perspective, the way you're looking at it might.
Right. And that
the way that I
yeah, go ahead.
The way that I try to sort of put this in perspective for clients is, you would never advise your child to talk to themselves the way that you're talking to yourself.
Right.
So why are you allowing yourself to put yourself down?
Right. Exactly. And we talked about at the beginning about freeing your mind, and about, we create our reality through our thoughts. And that concept doesn't change no matter what the situation is. Right. It's easy to, I think I personally have lost sight of that several times over the past year and a half, where outside forces I couldn't control were then, I for some reason believed that continuing to think negatively, or continuing to berate myself, or continuing to have this negative outcome was somehow going to improve the situation or change things. And that doesn't happen at all, right? We can't control everything, but we can control what we think and what our mind is. And again, like you said, it's not to minimize the stress and the feelings that you go through when you're in it, because I've been there. I know it. I'm intimately familiar with it. But I also trust and know, like you said, there's been situations I've been in that were terrible, that I didn't think I would come out on the other side of, but here I am today talking to you, having this conversation. And it's the same for everybody listening, right? I'm sure everyone has been in a situation they didn't get through and didn't think they could get through. But once you kind of come to terms with that and acknowledge the unknown, because that's a lot of it too, right? We're afraid of the unknown. But once we acknowledge that we're going to make it through, if nothing else, just out of sheer will, we're going to make it through. It takes some of the burden off. And I think it helps what you're saying. It helps us to do those exercises, or those, even have the awareness to stop that process, like to stop those thoughts being on that loop continuously that wants to just suffocate us.
Yes. Yeah. That is, I mean, if you can get a handle on that and just start to, show yourself some self-compassion,
Mm-hmm.
that's gonna deflate a lot of that balloon that just keeps growing and growing and growing.
Yeah, exactly. My guest this week has been Amy Sanchez, executive career and leadership coach and founder of Swim Against the Current. And we've been talking about don't flee to another job you'll hate. Instead, learn the secrets to finding a career you love. So as we wrap up the show, Amy, what is one piece of advice you would give the listeners to shift their perspective and about finding a career they love?
The biggest thing that I want to impart is, no matter where you are on your journey, whether you're just starting this job changing journey, whether you're just starting to recognize you're ready for it, or if you've just made the transition, just know that you're capable of creating any future that you want. It's entirely possible. But it all starts with the way that you're talking to yourself and what you believe the realm of possibilities are.
Yeah.
If you can start there and focus there, there's so much goodness ahead of you.
I love that. That is pretty much the epitome of this show and why I do this, to spread that message, and why I love talking to people like you, to be able to offer another perspective and